Welcome to the Fuel Pulse Show podcast. I am your host, Eric Bjornstad. I am your guide through the ever-changing world of fuel. The Fuel Pulse Show podcast is for anyone who uses fuel, and that's whether at work or at home. And that means it is pretty much for everyone, especially if you have a job that requires you to take care of fuel or fuel systems, or as we're going to be talking about today, tanks and things that store fuel and distribute fuel for use in other areas. If any of that, if you're responsible for any of that, then I really think you're going to like today's episode. So what are we going to be talking about today on the Fuel Pulse Show podcast? Well, today we are talking to CJ Schultz from Tanknology, who are the world's largest provider of, I won't say producer, but world's largest provider of tank testing and environmental compliance services for petroleum systems. So how big are they, you ask? Well, Tanknology, every year, I believe they test more than 2 million tanks, and they provide compliance services for more than, I think, 85,000 sites around the world. Now, so it's funny, you mentioned you've got New Jersey, where you're based in. We're down here in Florida.
Yeah.
Your parents are in, I would say, Eastern Ohio, maybe like Youngstown, some kind of area, Amish country.
Southeastern Ohio,
Yeah,
so
there you
they're
go. Yeah. And
off the grid.
so one thing I wanted to ask was, when you're talking about regulations, we know that there can be a lot of differences, big or small, in regulations between different states. So many states have different rules for different things. So just from your viewpoint on what you know about how things look across the country, what do you think are the biggest differences in the regulations for the kinds of things we're talking about on from a state to state level?
So put it at 30,000 feet is the
Yeah.
federal. So that's the
Yep.
law, and they promulgate it out to all the different states. Now the states can have state
Mm-hmm.
program approval. So each state, when the federal EPA says this is what we need to
Mm-hmm.
do or you need to do, that state is able to gather all their constituents, all the information, look at their existing
Yep.
regulations, and they need to make sure that those are as stringent or more stringent than the
Yes.
EPA's. At that point is when they submit it to the EPA, and the EPA says, all right, good, you're responsible. So they basically delegate it down to the state to run their compliance for all of these regulated storage tanks. Some states don't have the state program
Mm-hmm.
approval. They have their own, which in most cases usually mirror the EPA's
Yeah.
regulations. But you need to understand, as an operator, that the EPA, they can show up whenever, but if it's delegated to the state, that's who's carrying the
Yeah, that's who's
hammer,
going to
so to
show up.
speak, the paddle.
Yes.
But when you do the non-SPA states, it becomes a little bit more complex, because you need to make sure that you're meeting the federal requirement, because the EPA can do an audit
Mm-hmm.
and get involved. And you also need to make sure that the state, you're following their rules. That's where it gets. I mean, again, they're running parallel for the most part, but that's where, like, for Tanknology, we've got all our folks
Yeah.
out there, the ops managers, myself, dealing with multi-regional customers that aren't in one county or one state, and we're able to aggregate, bring that all together, and be a voice during the regulatory development. And we have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people, a lot of our ops managers, VPs, COO, CEO. They're on the committees for the best practices. And whenever there's a regulation type
Yeah.
discussion going, you can guarantee that somebody from Tanknology is sitting there and providing input and guidance based on the situation. So,
Now, do
yeah.
you happen to know, off the top of your head, which states, or are there notable states that are the non-SPA states?
Not off the top. I know New York was one
Okay.
of them. but it's on the EPA
Mm-hmm.
website. There's It's been delayed with COVID getting the proper
Yep.
updates, but a lot more states have come on board as far as with this new regulation to have ownership of that program. So that's when somebody calls in and they're like, "Hey, I'm in Georgia, Tennessee, this or that." That's when we go to our account management team, and we have that, our tanks
Yep.
database and our compliance database, and plug it in. It's somewhat liquid. Things are changing constantly, and it's really been a push. COVID delayed some things, trying to get it, everybody into that approval basket, so to speak. So
COVID did change a lot of things. I mean,
it did.
yeah, yeah, on multiple levels. Talking about uh, when you mention COVID delaying things, the thing that comes in my mind is whether these agencies have enough people or to do all the work that's involved. And if they don't have enough people, then it's going to it like you said, it delays things. Things don't get updated. Um, the question that comes to mind. Okay, so um, when did you? Well, first of all, when did you join Tanknology?
I right out of college in
Ah,
1997. So I'm approaching my, well, quarter of a century.
right. Yeah, yeah, and like I joined Bell at around 2006, so you got about 10 years on me.
Okay.
So you joined Technology really what during the Clinton administration, essentially.
Yeah, and I came right in at the tail end. There was a year to upgrade and do a bunch of changes to your
Yep.
systems to meet the EPA
So
requirements.
there
But
have been a
yeah,
lot of changes that have gone, and the thing that have gone on, and the thing that makes me
yep,
think is, so you started in the Clinton administration, then you had Bush, the Bush two terms there, then two
right.
terms of Obama, then we have Trump, now we have Biden. Um, I imagine that you've seen some pretty sharp contrasts in how these regulations are handled, how these different agencies work. Um, is there anything notable that you've seen over the years since you have experience in what 4 or 5 different presidential administrations? What stands out to you?
I mean, honestly, the government process of getting everything, changed and vetted, that's its own
Mm-hmm.
entity. So I would think that's really the only thing that probably it goes fast, it slows down based on, who's in
Yep.
charge. I'm like, at the end of the day, the focus is on the finish line. And I mean, what you might get done in your house in a week is going to take a month, just
Mm-hmm.
for comparison's sakes. So when it comes to administrations, and that's a good question, but I mean, they're both focused. The Democrat, Republican, whatever, have been focused on, making sure that the EPA's got what they need to do to get the job done. And I haven't seen, like, oh my gosh, one person came in and everything just went
Yeah.
crazy. I will say, like, people had a edge about when Trump
Sure.
came in, just because, he's less
Mm-hmm.
regulation. He was very vocal
Yep.
about it. But I think at the end of the day, nothing really changed. I mean, because the root constituents, the base, the people in the industry, we
We're still here.
know, and everybody truly wants to make sure that the environment's protected, and we learn from our mistakes and make it better. So I think that goes both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely would agree with that. But what we tend to get very fractured in our social discourse and in our views of what we think the country should be like. But in the end, I think that we have to really get back to the point where we can at least assume that the person that who might disagree with how to get there they still have the same positive motivations that we think we do on that.
Well, that's what's kept me as part, like, in the petroleum sandbox. I mean, it's a group of people from the EPA to the one site
Hmm.
operators that you just forge these relationships. And I've been fortunate enough, and many of my colleagues, to go across the country, and it's the same everywhere. You got your regional
Yeah.
flavors and whatnot, but at the end of the day, everybody wants to stay out of the spotlight,
Hmm.
the trouble
Yeah.
spotlight, and, that's where we team up, regardless of what your views or
Yep.
thoughts are. You have to do A, B, and C, and either we shake it, we're going to handle it, or you're just going to do part of it, and vice versa. And that's the dance as you come on board with
Yeah,
us.
yeah. Well, and you talking about the people at the various agencies, what that stands out to me is it I'm reminded of some things that I had recently read, where basically what they were talking about how government works and how policies are developed and implemented starting at the federal level and then bleeds down from there. And I think many people,
Hmm.
unless they really pay attention to and really have the taste for getting into the weeds on things like this, what they may not realize is that, yeah, we can have a new president that comes in and he puts in a new administration, but the way that our government is built, with these all these different layers through these different agencies, there are people at, let's say, the EPA who have been there. They are subject matter experts, and the systems are set up so that everything has to flow through, and you basically have to, I guess, build consensus, if you will, and
Yes,
you have,
checks and
yeah,
balances.
exactly, checks and balances. And so when you talk about contrast between like the Trump administration versus, I don't know, the Obama administration versus Biden or Bush or whatever, yeah, there might be sharp contrasts in the rhetoric that they use, but what didn't change was that you had all the people underneath who, by and large, they all want to do their jobs well, and they all care about the things
Yep.
that they're charged with. And so in the end, like you were saying, there may not be that significant a change in how things look on the ground level, because it had much less to do with the president than it did with the people at the other layers, who are the ones that really are the people who know what they're doing.
Well, our industry is just evolving with technology and reality. Things are getting older, so the new regulations that came
Mm-hmm.
in, it was time. It made sense. There were new systems invented. Everything was becoming double wall versus
Yep.
single wall, all these sensors. So it only made sense that those needed to be
Mm-hmm.
tested or monitored. Our Going back to when I first started, 24 years
Mm-hmm.
ago, we were installing a ton of these automatic tank gauging systems for the major
Yeah.
oils. That way they could aggregate their data, know what was going on, because they didn't want to be in the news for some anomaly release. They wanted to make sure that they knew if there was an issue, they could get on it right away. And then we're out there
Yep.
testing it
Mm-hmm.
afterwards. So that's the key factor, is just having the visibility. And no one that I've ran into is out there maliciously looking to cause harm to the
No.
environment. In general, most people are reaching out, and we're a partner to make sure that they don't have a release, because that's 1,000 times, maybe even more expensive than not being doing a best
Yep.
practice. You have a release, it can sink you real quick.
Oh, sure.
If you don't have the right test or insurance, there's a myriad of
Yeah,
things.
yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, I've said this a couple times before, but it bears repeating that, we all want what's good for the country. All the people in government do want what's good for the country. They may disagree on how best to get there, but I think we would all be a lot better off, I think, if we assumed the better parts of human nature rather than automatically assuming the worst, which unfortunately tends to be too much the direction. Hopefully, we can
But
reverse that. But
on that, well, that's like from a sales perspective. I meet all walks of
yep,
life. And when you're out there, I don't care if you're blue or
no,
from Mars. I mean, it's really like what do we here? How do we help
yep,
you understand how to stay in the compliance? And there's plenty of people out there that they don't know what they
they
don't
don't know what
know.
they
I
don't
mean,
know.
I learn something new every
Oh, sure.
month, probably daily, and I don't even realize it going through this. But let alone to have somebody come in, try hiring somebody and be like, oh, we got a leak detector, this or that. I take for granted, even in this podcast, talking the
Hmm.
lingo, that everybody else knows what
Oh,
it
yeah.
is. I'm like, we're in a little corner of the world.
Yeah,
So you got to slow it down.
I am surprised. I'm surprised at the number of times I'm surprised. I should say at what I assume people know, which it turns out that they don't. So, like whenever I'm doing training for people, I always have to start by saying, so like microbial testing, for example, we do a lot of
But
ATP by filtration testing, and so I'll start off with, so how many of you know what ATP is? And the vast majority of times, nobody does. And then that gives me a chance to educate them on what it is, and then talk about the value of the that kind of testing, so on and so forth. But yeah, I'm always surprised by what people don't know, and just like you, I'm always learning new things, because it's a complex world out there. There's always something, always something to learn.
it is. And then you got to sort through it
Yeah.
sometimes to understand, unlearn it.
Well, yeah, yeah. Sometimes you can learn things that, well, and that's the thing. You learn things, you think that they're true, and then at some point in the future, you always have to hold out the chance that you could be wrong about something. Or
Well, and that's where we've put we put our feet on the street. So I go back. The one that I remember the most vividly was this recent one with the testing of the
okay.
sumps. 3-year hydrostatic testing on dispensers, pans, as well as on tanks. When we first started going into this, people were telling our customers, and there'd be people coming to me that were like, hey, such and such just tested my first site. Now, mind you, they might have 30
Mm-hmm.
facilities, and now they want to replace all my boots and my sumps, and it's going to cost like $60,000. And I'm like, well, Tanknology, the think tank or the brain
Yeah.
trust, so to speak, were able to identify, when did a specific state, and this goes back to a few questions
Mm-hmm.
ago, implement the
Yeah.
requirement to have double wall piping and that interstitial
Yep.
monitoring. If you were installed before that, you don't need to test these sumps if you had them installed. Or you might be able to re-register your former release detection to where our annual line test for $100 or $150 would offset a sump test. And then if it fails, which most of them
Mm-hmm.
would, because they've never been tested and they were installed without needing to be tested. I can't tell you how many customers were so glad to know that they did not have to test their sumps. And if they did, we certainly had the playbook as to, we need to do this, we need to do that. Let's survey
Yep.
first before, it's all reportable failures. And then, there's a way to go about it the right way.
Well,
So
and it helps for that end customer that you're talking about. It helps that they had a relationship with somebody like Tanknology who actually knew the right questions to ask and knew that there
yeah,
were the right had a more in-depth knowledge of the regulations, ended up probably saving them a boatload of money.
yeah. And then, I mean, and that's, there's been a handful of those instances where when you try to interpret law
Yeah.
or
Mm-hmm.
regulations, it's not easy. So we've got so many people with such a breadth of knowledge that they're asking the right questions. As soon as it's
Yep.
proposed, we're going through it, we're participating. So Yeah, it's been vetted by somebody on our side, and we have the states coming to individuals,
Yep.
and we talk to the EPA, to give them our advice. We have so much testing data, we can kind of help forecast and see where testing a secondary containment in
Mm-hmm.
California, going way back in the early
Yeah.
2000s, was real bad the first year or cycle for the people, and not horrible, but it progressively got better to where now everything's tight pretty much well all the time. So the rules do work. It's the enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
the testing, and the discussions as to how to make it even better. Don't just sit on your laurels and it's like, oh, it's all right. We're always looking to innovate.
So if we're looking towards the future, I know earlier we talked about some things like like the trends in electric cars and the shifting away from petroleum engines. So if you're looking to the future, with respect to the regulations that are out there in the different areas that you have experience in, um, are there particular things that you would like to see if you could say best case scenario, I'd like to see this and this happen in the regulatory arena. Um, are there
I mean, I don't know. I think with the new regs that just came out, and we've been through a cycle here. Um, there's enough on the plate right
yeah,
now. I mean, it's certainly going to evolve as technologies improve. I will say there are several states that have pretty robust databases
yeah,
that as technology testers or employees, we are responsible for entering data into those databases. So when we test A, B, C, and D,
hmm,
we're putting our name
yep,
on it. On not that we're already doing that in our system, but to have that centralized area it helps. It improves everything.
absolutely,
Technology, well, us being around for as long as we have a pretty robust QA QC process. We're one of the only ones or companies that has actual employees that are
yep,
driving around checking on our technicians. We're not flying by night. They're out there looking through a certain percentage of everybody's reports to make sure that they're doing their job correctly and that they're trained properly. So one of the things that always comes up from time to time, depending on who you're talking to, is if there was a uniform like certification
hmm,
process, that there was a standard. Like I'm NACE, so that means I should be able to do A, B, C, and D. But for a technician, technology, we send our techs to boot camp for a week after they've had 3 to 4 months in the field experience, and they're working on the actual systems, doing the tests. And you can't just fog a mirror. You got to pass the test, and you have to be able to prove that you know how to do it in front of your
hmm,
peers. And some people can't, and they don't make it. They don't get employed. So that's to me like the wish list, so to speak, is just
yep,
accountability, and improvements. There's so much data out there. To all of our customers, they needed deficiency reports, or management by exception is the only way you're going to succeed in this world, especially if you have a portfolio. One tank site is can be difficult enough if that's not your thing. Like
yep,
the retail folks, that's what they deal with. So it's a little different animal than somebody at a hospital that's just more worried about keeping the lights
yeah.
on, not
Or
necessarily
passing
what's leaking here and there.
the Joint Commission inspection.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
yeah, and the two things you bring up, I think, are would be really good if they became more industry standards. The record keeping, which we touched on multiple times, the fact that so many don't keep the kinds of records that they should, and then really important, the technician training. I think that it's really important for people out there who are looking at this kind of work, that the people that they do business with, whether it's technology or somebody else, that they have confidence that those technicians are rigorously trained. And it sounds like what
Right.
you're talking about is about as good as it gets, really.
It is. I mean, we like to think it's the gold standard. You know, we're really vetting out these folks, and it is not, especially now. I think it's even more important to have even that robust, background check, so to
Hmm.
speak, because with COVID and as things move, the service industry, it's very
Yeah.
difficult to retain folks and to get somebody new when they can make X dollars programming, if that's their thing, or go out in the field and wrench on a underground storage tank.
Yeah, that that
It's
could be a
tough.
whole that could be a whole nother episode talking about the problems
Right.
that we're having in the labor market. Which, yeah, I mean, I think we're
And we've been very fortunate. I mean, we've been very fortunate with our, we've focused on that as a company, to make sure that our employees, and specifically our technicians, have the best training, and are coming in to succeed. Because it can be so overwhelming versus like when I first started, was able to put on tank cleaning, then cathodic
yep.
protection, then this. Now just the core section to come in and be an ops manager, the amount of data flying on your computer and on the phone is pretty intense. So it's good we have a bench that
Hmm.
can help those people progress, and then eventually take our position so we can move on to new things as well.
Well, and the other thing that comes to mind, which dovetails into what you were just talking about, is given the way that the labor market has changed and the upheavals that we've seen, um, I think that more and more companies they're finding it hard to get good people, as they say. It's really important to retain the ones that you have, and the way that you retain them is you treat them well. You make it
Yep.
worth their while to stay, and it's not just paying them what they're worth, if you wanted to put it that way. That may look different to different people, but paying them a satisfactory wage, but it's also in how you treat them, how you make them feel valued. That builds loyalty, and I think in the age that we're moving into, because it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse, although that's not really the right way to put it, because it's not a worse situation. um, that's important to people. And it sounds like, with technology, you guys know that, yeah, you have to train your employees, train your technicians to be experts, but you also have
Yep.
to make sure you build loyalty by how you treat them, and it sounds like you guys know what you're doing there.
Um, I mean, my coworkers, Alan Porter, our CEO, I mean, we really are focused on
Hmm.
people. I mean, at the end of the day, you need the right people. Our tenureship, like in most cases, like if you're here over 3 to 5 years, you're
Yep.
locked. And it's just a family. It's really an
Absolutely.
extension of a family, and very fortunate to be part of that, and to continue hopefully and keep rolling it. We do with the helping people at the end of
Well,
the day.
and that is one of the things I will tell everyone, about Bell Performance, who I'm with. That's one of the hallmarks of our company. Is it's a family atmosphere. Everybody knows everybody else. The president knows, what's going on with your kids. It's
Right,
it's
right.
uh, it's an
Yeah,
atmosphere where people feel valued, and it's not just about the X's and O's, bottom lines, yes or no type things. It's a relationship that I know I've been here for 16 years, and it's
yeah.
it's something that you don't find in a lot of places. But I think that more and more companies are going to have to build that, uh, because more and more people are making the determination that it's not just about dollars and cents for them.
Very much so. I mean, I think that's the COVID effect.
Hmm.
I think people are. depending on where you are in your career or life, I mean, it's just some people, it seems they just want to relax a little
Yeah,
more
yeah, yeah,
or not, not be under the pressure
yeah.
gun. So how we articulate our stresses to our employees and helping them out and whatnot is very important. And I'm glad I'm not
Oh
25
gosh,
anymore.
yeah, yeah. I yeah, it's a much different world than when we were 25, that's for sure. Actually, it's interesting. Last couple of questions. Um, you know, so you've been in the business through, we'll say, multiple presidential administrations. You've been in the business a long time. You've seen a lot. So in the years that you've been in this business, are there any things that come to mind that you know that you've learned that you know now that would have surprised you if you could go back to, let's say, your younger University of Toledo self? Um, if you could go back and tell your younger self, X, Y, or Z, um, it would have surprised you a lot.
I think I would have looked back and tell myself to slow down because technology, and I mean, I wasn't surprised. I've always been like driven, and most of my counterparts are. We knew we got the eye on the
Mm-hmm.
prize, but you don't need to be there tomorrow. Learn your from your
Mm-hmm.
mistakes, kind of take a deep breath. And with all these regulations, I mean, again, like kind of what we do now, it's never changed. We take care of our employees. I was surrounded by a great group of individuals that were able to guide me and temper me back. But I know I was a bulldog as a kid, like just starting. Like you really don't know
Uh-huh.
everything, and you never do. And it just takes a capacity. That's the other thing. It amazes me, and that's what I enjoy about the position when somebody new comes in to help them succeed, because I didn't have that all the time, where somebody could come in and give you a little
Yep.
mentorship to be like, hey, listen, what you think's crazy right now will be like an hour of your time in 10 years. It's consuming you for like a week. I'm like, don't worry about it. Like, you're going to get through this,
Mm-hmm.
and here's how we do it, and things like that. So just becoming older.
Yep, yep, yep. And I mean, we are, we are. If you think about it, we're members of the the last generation that knew what life was like before the internet. Because
Yeah.
and the kids that are growing up now, like my 9-month old, he's gonna grow up assuming that the way things are, the way they always have been. But like you said, if you go back to starting your first job in 1997, it's completely different now, and just the way the internet has
Totally.
changed things. Um,
Like, who knows what a fax machine is? That's how we got our orders in.
uh-huh.
Was like we would write it up, print it, fax it out, and they'd fax it back in, and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
email started.
yeah.
We know where that all went.
Yep. Yeah, but change is good. Because 20 years from now, well, 20 years from now, I'll probably be ready for retirement, but 20 years from now, things are gonna look even more different than they are now. But it'll all be good. I mean, yeah.
No, it's
Yeah.
definitely.
All right.
It's packaging more
Mm-hmm.
information in a smaller space.
Well, and that's the thing I think with people who are going up in school now, kids who are in school now and going into college. I think that the really important thing for them is to be able to uh, not well to be able to find information and know what to do with it, which is different from how it was, let's say in the early 90s when I was in college. um, you know we have access to virtually anything we need to find out almost instantaneously, which means we need to
True.
have different skills. um, yeah, so all right. Well, CJ, it's been great talking to you, and just want to
Same
ask,
here.
where can people find you if they want to find out more about what Tanknology does and about all the things that you can do for them? Where can they go?
Oh, the best is our website, www.tanknology.com. It has all of our services, more than enough
Of which there are
information on
many.
there to get you to there are. So you can go down any one of the many rabbit holes, or you can email me to CJ Schultz, SCHULTZ, at tanknology.com. And like I tell most folks, if I don't know the answer, I can certainly find it or know somebody that
Well,
knows it.
that's an excellent point that we can kind of close out with is because many times I'll say something similar, and I think people appreciate that nobody's going to have every answer to every question, but somebody asks you a question, or somebody asks me a question, and we don't know the answer, we'll say, um, well, I don't know that, but I can find out and I'll get back to
Yep.
you on it. And if they built up enough trust, if you built up enough trust with them, they will know that you're going to give them the best answer, whether it's in your own interest, technology's interest. You're going to give them the right answer no matter
Yep.
what.
Yep.
Yep,
No, definitely. I mean, it's all about trust.
absolutely. Which that's something that's very important in this industry. So. Um,
It
Well,
is.
CJ, it has definitely been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for taking time out of your
Same
day,
here.
sharing your experience and your perspective with us and our listening and viewing audience. Really appreciate it. So thank you. And so
You're very welcome.
that about wraps things up for today's episode of the Fuel Pulse Show podcast. Thank you for spending part of your day or night with us. Check the show notes at our website for links to everything that was mentioned in this episode. That's at www.bellperformance.com. Please make sure to subscribe to this podcast in iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you happen to get your podcasts. And last but not least, if you like what you heard, feel free to leave us a good rating on those sites as well, because that really helps people find us. So we would appreciate it if you do that as well. So bye-bye, everyone. Catch you next time on the Fuel Pulse Show podcast.